Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
Oh my God, standard. I just don't even understand how this is a real format.
Why? Because it's actually good?
It's so dynamic.
There we go.
Like, it's unbelievable. Like, when we started talking about Core Set 2020 Standard, we were talking about maybe the return of Mono Blue, the Blue-Green Flash deck. There was some 2-3 flyers that could turn off Nissa. And then the red deck is different. And there's like resurgence in all these previous archetypes. And then now we have like this deck that I think it's so wonderful. It's so different. It's so powerful. It's so ingenious.
You're talking about the 4-color Kethis combo deck, right?
What else could I have been talking about? This deck is, I think it's just, I don't know if it's a masterwork. It's different than everything we've seen. It does so many cool things. It plays cool cards.
I know that people are all excited about it and saying it's different from things we've seen. I wonder how different it really is. Like, we talked about a deck almost exactly like this.
Well,
like a month ago, somebody top 60 forward, with and admittedly, without Diligent Excavator, it's not even the same kind of a thing, right?
Yeah. So
but that's one of those examples of when sometimes sometimes it's not just tuning, it's actually just a paradigm shift about what you're even doing. Because it wasn't even really a combo deck, it was more of a synergy deck then.
Yeah, like it was before, I think, kind of a grindy mid-range card advantage strategy. And to be fair, the Kethis combo deck actually still has a lot of that going for it, right? So
yeah, it's almost all the same cards.
Yeah.
It's just like 4 copies of the good cards, cut some of the loose stuff, and then add Diligent Excavator to help set up the combo.
So the core of this deck starts, I'm just to plot it out, imagine it's unopposed, right? If you start with Diligent Excavator is 1 and a blue for a 1/3 human artificer, and it has the ability, whenever you cast a historic spell, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So that can be you or it can be the opponent. And just as a little piece of reminder text, artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. So if your deck is full of legendary planeswalkers or legendary creatures or artifacts, whether they're legendary artifacts or not, it happens to have some legendary artifacts, I think, they will all trigger Diligent Excavator, right?
It just happens to? That's the most important one.
Well, yep, that it is very central to the theme of this deck. And then you have Kethis the Hidden Hand, which is kind of the namesake of this deck, which is a white, a black, and a green for a 3/4 legendary creature Elf Advisor. So on the stats, Kethis is already difficult to get through for some decks in Standard, right? So 3/4 for 3. But he has 2 very important pieces of text. One of them is legendary spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. But the other one is exile 2 legendary cards from your graveyard. Until end of turn, each legendary card in your graveyard gains. You may play this card from your graveyard. Right? So you were alluding to this a second ago. Arguably the most important thing when you put these 2 cards together is Mox Amber.
Yeah, when you've got Diligent Excavator stocking your graveyard, you end up in a spot where you can just pitch extra redundant copies of random planeswalkers or whatever, and then you exile 2 of them, and then now your whole graveyard Yawgmoth's willed for the legendary permanents, which includes Mox Amber. And so you play Mox Amber, and even though it's going to kill a Mox Amber that you already have in play, assuming you have 2, you net a mana. And all your Mox Ambers can be played. So each time you do it, you're actually getting mana for all the Mox Ambers in your graveyard. And then you actually can do it again, because each time you play a Mox Amber, you're milling 2 more cards. And so you end up with just an enormous number of cards milled, and you can just keep replaying the Mox Ambers, because each time you want to play all your Mox Ambers, you just have to exile 2 more legends from your graveyard. So you mill your whole deck, make a bunch of mana with Mox Amber, and then you can just win at your leisure. You know.
So, is there a reason why you can't just go Diligent Excavator into Kethis, right? Now, you already have Kethis in play. You just played it with Diligent Excavator, so you presumably mill yourself here, right? So you're putting 2 cards in your graveyard. Let's assume, for sake of argument, one of the 2 cards that you put into your graveyard was a Mox Amber, and then the other one was a different legendary card. Now, you have a Mox Amber in your hand, which you now play. The Mox Amber in your hand, again, triggers Diligent Excavator, and we're a little bit less lucky this time. And all we do is mill, let's say, a land and an Ashiok or something. At this point, I can remove the Ashiok and the whatever other random legend I have in my graveyard to activate Kethis and play the Mox Amber from my graveyard. But first, I'm going to tap the one in play for mana, right? So when I do that, 2 things happen. I put the Mox Amber from my graveyard into play, which kills the original Mox Amber, which is now conveniently in the graveyard, where I have this great Kethis ability, and I trigger my Diligent Excavator again, and I have the opportunity to net another mana again, right? So depending on how the mills go, I can do a ton of different things, right? Like I can potentially draw my library with Fibblethip, right? I can potentially nuke my opponent to death with recurring Oath of Kaya, right? Like,
yeah, I was going to say Oath of Kaya is like a really important part of the equation a lot of the time. Because you get to, it only costs 2 mana also. Because of the Kethis mana reduction.
Yeah.
So basically every 2 mana you can drain your opponent for 3. So you just have to, it takes 2 Mox Ambers and an Oath of Kaya, but you actually don't have to exile 2 cards from your graveyard each time because all your Oath of Kayas will be animated, you know?
So when this card says, until end of turn, each legendary card in your graveyard gains, you may play this card from your graveyard. That is an attribute that's given to the legendary cards that are in your graveyard right now. Not an attribute
it's like
Yawgmoth's
Right? Right, it's like Yawgmoth's Will, where you have a second graveyard that doesn't have it in effect.
So, because if it were the alternative, in the same situation I was talking about, if it was an attribute of your graveyard rather than...
Nah, you could just go forever.
You would just mill your opponent out with the Mox Ambers, right? Like,
right.
You would just start targeting them.
Right.
Anyway, this deck has a lot of cards that are not central to the combo. Now, obviously, Teferi Time Raveler, I mean, that's just super convenient, right? If you can untap with Teferi and...
Yeah, that's just putting a legendary card in your deck that's good. It's not like Teferi is material to the plan.
Although it protects the plan. You know, Diligent Excavator isn't exactly the most durable card in the world.
Well, actually, it's funny you should mention that. One of the key components that I think was lost on a lot of people is how Lezav, the Multifarious, works because of Diligent Excavator. You see, Diligent Excavator is the only non-land card in the entire deck that isn't legendary. So when your Kethis is in effect, Kethis is reducing the cost of almost everything, and it lets you exile anything to get anything, right? So it's very, very live. Why is Diligent Excavator the one exception? It's because of the extremely efficient rate at which it gives you this huge mill. But the problem is that because it's not a legend, you can't play a second one out of your graveyard, so you could stall out. You see, just having one Excavator means that each time you play Mox Amber, you're milling 2 cards, but you're not necessarily going to mill 2 legends. You're not necessarily... You can run out.
Oh, yeah, your expected value is only 1 legend, right, per mill.
Right, and even if you get a chance to play a few cards, because sometimes you can jumpstart things with the fact that, like, Fibblethip the Lost only costs 1 mana and is a cantrip, so it's actually kind of like, it's not a bad way to do it. You know, you're losing a mana, but you are getting 2 more mills from your Excavator, and a cantrip. So you are kind of making some progress. But one of the things that Kethis, the hidden hand, does is that Lazav, is that Lazav is a legend. So you can actually play Lazav out of your graveyard and pay 2 to copy a Diligent Excavator that you've milled.
So now, once you've done that, like all the cards that you're playing, all the legendary cards, or I'm sorry, historic cards you're playing out of your hand or out of your graveyard are just getting 4 mil instead of 2 mil, right?
Right, and
literally
even if you
for no mana.
Yes, and importantly, there's going to be times where you don't even have the excavator. You're just going to be playing, and Tamio and Ashiok both let you self-mill besides the Diligent Excavator. You see, the Diligent Excavator, that's the glue that brings it all together. But when you Tamio and Ashiok, it gives you a lot of looks for Diligent Excavator. You know, like Tamio and Ashiok milling yourself is going to make it so that your Lazav can actually switch into being an excavator, so that you can get that first excavator just to get the party started.
Oh, that's quite powerful. I mean, not for nothing, Ashiok, 2 in the main and 1 in the sideboard, makes this deck pre-sideboarded for the ever-present Scapeshift matchup also.
Yeah, I mean, Teferi's not too bad there either.
Yep.
But yeah, Ashiok's a killer. So how you actually win is kind of interesting. Besides just the looping of the Oath of Kea, it's a real thing to just run your opponent out of cards with Diligent Excavator, and a little bit of Ashiok help.
Yeah, if you have enough stuff in your graveyard at a certain point, right, you can just activate Kethis and then start taking things out of your graveyard and then just pointing excavator triggers at the opponent, right? They're free.
Yep. And then the Urza's Ruinous Blast is it's the only defense in the deck besides the Oath of Chaos. Like your deck's got some Planeswalkers, you can buy yourself some time, but it's really relying on the fact that the format has slowed down a little bit and there aren't as many must-kill threats that people are actually playing. But yeah, Urza's Ruinous Blast is like a key form of defense. Like you don't really have much, but it's totally one-sided, and then you just hope they don't have too many legends. At least game 1.
I mean, it's extremely powerful, right? Like this can kill all the 2/2 tokens in play. I mean, it gets people's key permanents that aren't legendary. Like it might get a Frenzy, or it might get. I was going to say a Planeswalker. It wouldn't get a Planeswalker, but I think like most people's permanents are not going to be legendary for the most part.
Well, the big thing is that it hits a lot of vampires. Right now, Vampires is like the most popular deck. It's really been on the surging and climbing. And Vampires is one of the few decks that's actually fast enough and aggressive enough to really put a meaningful amount of pressure on a deck like this in time, Because some of the other fast decks like White Splash Blue or Mono Red are just not winning right now. But Vampires is doing pretty well and is pretty fast. Urza's Ruinous Blast doesn't kill everything in the Vampire deck, but it kills enough. And remember, you can Ruinous Blast ahead of schedule. Not just the fact that Kethis makes Ruinous Blast only cost 4, but the fact that you actually have Mox Amber, right? So you could actually do it. Even now, you can't really cheat the system and get down or blast on 3. Like you don't get, you just don't have any 1-cost legends, so it just doesn't curve out right. But like it gives you more outs to actually getting there with your 4-color mana base, including lots of tap lands.
Yeah, can you play Urza's Ruinous Blast out of your graveyard with Kethis? You can, right?
So Kethis does any legendary card, legendary sorceries, legendary planeswalkers, legendary enchantments, legendary artifacts, all of it. Creatures too.
So, wow, that's really, really strong.
Well, and that's part of the reason why the sideboard is set up the way it is. So, like, if you look at Strasky's winning list, the sideboard contains almost entirely, I mean, there's more than half of the sideboard is legendary permanents, legendary cards. So there's another Urza's Ruinous Blast for when you actually need some defense, another Ashiok for the Scape Shift matchup, another Tamio for when you're actually grinding. But the anti-discard part is pretty relevant against some of these black decks. Then beyond that, though, 2 Tashar Ancestors Apostle is kind of a really interesting backup plan for, not even a backup plan, but sort of a alt-wing condition, making it so that you can just make it easy on yourself. You can loop something pretty intensely. You know, like the fact that each time you cast a Mox Amber, you can just play a card out of, you can play an Ashiok or a Teferi or a Kethis or a Fiddlethip or Lezav or even extra excavators. You get to just do everything so hard. And in fact, you can actually just get into a spot where you quickly go, a single Mox Amber gets back a Oath of Kea, a single Mox Amber gets back an Oath of Kea, and then you've net mana. So it's just actually very easy. Like, Tashar is the way to get out of it. Whatever you need to do, Tashar lets you go much, much, much bigger.
You can't do infinite mana with only 2 Mox Ambers. You need 3, right? Because it's when let's say for sake of argument, you had Mox Amber in your graveyard and Mox Amber in your hand. You cast a Mox Amber and then you want to return a Mox Amber to play. The one from the graveyard will go to play, but then but there's not going to be. Is there an opportunity for you?
Yeah. So so the problem is that Tashar only gets back creatures.
Oh.
It's not like Tashar is making one Mox Amber get another Mox Amber, but you're still doing it because you could just keep playing Fibblethip because for 1 mana. You're getting to play a Mox Amber, and I mean you're not looping, but you're doing pretty big things here.
So Tashar is there it's probably like a super overperformer in matchups that don't have like Shock and Lightning Strike, right? Like decks that don't like this deck, for example, is quite creature removal poor. It has Oath of Kea and Urza's Ruinous Blast, and Urza's Ruinous Blast doesn't even hit cards like Tashar. Right, so if you were in the mirror match, Tashar is the kind of card that you might want to bring in.
That you would want to bring in.
You would, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Seems very good.
Yeah, and I think you want Tashar against anybody sufficiently slow. It's not a card for when you're facing fast matchups at all, but no matter what they're doing, if they're slowing the matchup down, Tashar is going to be good for you. So there's also an additional backup win condition, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Partly it's just for grinding, but the thing is that the deck can very quickly self-mill, and then you can actually just circumvent a lot of things by making it so that Jace gets to use the ultimate. Like the passive, I mean. If you would draw a card while you have none, you win the game instead.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, this is the second deck we've seen in Core Set 2020 Standard that uses Jace, Wielder of Mysteries to actually win the game, right? Do you remember there was that Omniscience deck in Week 1?
Right, yep. And so then there's Tolsimir, Friend to Wolves. And I think that Tolsimir is kind of just... Like, some people would just play, like, one Baneslayer in the controlled deck sideboard, or some other random miscellaneous one-off threat.
Sure.
Sam Black actually played one Massacre Girl, which is a legend. But one Massacre Girl for a similar reason. It just gives you an extra angle, an extra dimension.
I think I like a Massacre Girl insofar that it can potentially kill a bunch of 2/2 tokens. Right? You got to get the party started, but once the party gets started, then Massacre Girl can help you out. And
then the non-legendary cards here. 2 Cerulean Drakes, obviously just a concession to if you actually do get stuck facing red, because even though red hasn't been doing that well, anybody fast is not what you want to face, And then 2 Legion's Ends. This is another form of interaction against somebody fast that lets you slow them down. But part of the reason to use Legion's End is, of course, how much you get to sweep the board of zombies.
Yep.
And then the Elder Spell goes without saying. Whether it's the Mirror or any other matchup where there's a lot of Planeswalkers, it's just a great option. And then finally, Unmoored Ego is another card for the Scapeshift matchup and the Mirror.
So I actually am a little dubious on Cerulean Drake. Now, obviously, Cerulean Drake is an absolute murderer of mono red decks, but this deck doesn't seem bad against red to me. Like, Oath
a little
of
slow.
Chaos,
A little slow.
Is really good. I think
when you draw it.
Getting through Kethis isn't that easy. 3/4 is tough for red. Like, they need to team up 2 cards to get through most of the time. Like, if it's anything except for a Goblin Chain Whirler. And I don't know. Like, I don't think that as someone who's played a bunch of mono red, this isn't the matchup. I'm not champing at the bit to hit this matchup. I don't know. I think it's one of the ones that maybe I could win, but I would feel challenged.
For what it's worth, Sam Black's version he had a pretty good record, but he narrowly missed the top. He actually didn't use Cerulean Drake. He in those slots used so instead of 2 Legion's End and 2 Cerulean Drake, he had one Legion's End, 1 Noxious Grasp, 1 Devout Decree, and then 2 Selective Snare.
So which one is Selective Snare?
It's the bounce spell that it's X blue, return X target creatures of the creature type of your choice to the owner's hand. And the reason is he wanted to slant his list more against vampires, I'm guessing. Like, the amount that you can just spend... Remember, like, the vampires even cheat a 5-drop down on turn 3.
Oh, that's their main thing. That's like how they...
Right, so
that's how they jump to, potentially position 1 in Standard.
So if you actually can just bounce all 3 of their creatures on turn 4, that's a real solid follow-up.
Yeah, I mean... As long as you've got a guy left to just, like, swing into their Sorin, I think that you're probably in a pretty good spot.
The other stuff that Sam Black did... So Sam's list is basically the same sort of a thing. The 2 big twists to his main deck were he actually played the 3 Tashars and the 1 Jace Wielder of Mysteries all main. He just wanted to make it easier on himself. And then second... And I know you're going to love this. He was packing 2 copies of Kamal's Druidic Vow.
Because, you got to have some legendary sorceries.
He wanted to replace Urza's Ruinous Blast with more proactive engine. What do you think of that? It helps explain why he needs the Selective Snares in the sideboard.
I mean, first of all, props to just getting Kamal's Druidic Vow into your deck. Right? Like, that's a card that people have been really potentially excited to play with, but has just never really...
People. Like you.
This is a really proactive deck. And you have a card like Urza's Ruinous Blast, which is a powerful get-out-of-jail-free card, only it doesn't always get you out of jail, right? I think at least with Kamal's Druidic Vow, if you're casting it for the X that you want, in the spot that you want, you're likely to be getting... You're getting forward, right? Isn't that kind of what you want here? Like, so if you have enough mass, like, there's a lot of momentum to this deck.
Well, for what it's worth, Sam mentioned that with what he knows now, he would play 0 Kamal's Druidic Vows and 0 Urza's Ruinous Blasts in the main deck. He actually says that it's just better to do neither, and that you should just use more of those slots on cards that are good. So he wants to replace his Kamal Druidic Vows were instead of Urza's Ruinous Blast, but he says that he just want to play some of the some of the Ashioks that, like Strosky had 2 Ashioks.
Yep.
Sam had no Ashioks, and in retrospect, he says the Ashiok seems too good to not do.
Well, I mean, Ashiok does a proactive thing in this deck, and it's really just a free win against Scapeshift decks. I think you can be real happy about that. Or like it doesn't even have to be Scapeshift. Like other decks that are utilizing Circuitous Route or any kind of ramp decks are negatively impacted.
The other thing is that once you have Ashiok in the deck, Sam notes that you don't need Jace in the deck anymore. Ashiok's just better at doing that. He still likes Jace in the sideboard, but the big difference, the only main things that he's holding on to are one Tashar, Ancestor's Apostle, and one Vraska, Golgari Queen.
So tell me about that Ashiok versus Jace. Like, I understand that they have some overlap, right? But I feel like they're different. Like, Ashiok seems like he's kind of pointing at the opponent and potentially...
Well, no. Ashiok gets the party started on yourself. No, that was the part that...
I understand that you can do that, like, in the exclusion of a Diligent Excavator. I'm saying, like, I just imagined he's usually aiming at the opponent, and Jace is usually... Like, I feel like Ashiok is, like, punching somebody, and Jace is, like, kind of a grindy card. Like, that's just in my head.
Yeah, but I don't think grinding isn't the thing you need more of. I think you want to be faster and more turbo. You know?
Yeah. Even if you're not getting a card out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of it is that it's just really good in the mirror. And so, like, going forward... Because remember, Ashiok exiles the opponent's graveyard no matter where you point it. And the incidental exiling of the graveyard is actually pretty devastating in the mirror.
Oh, yeah. Like, one of the play patterns of this deck is to not do anything for a while, right? Just, like, trade cards. And then when you go for your, like, Kethis-type play, it's because you've already got some material in your graveyard that you can exploit. If you get a turn pass where the opponent Ashioks themselves, let's say, but removes your graveyard, then that plan isn't even available to you.
Yeah. But I don't know, man. What do you think, man? This deck looks amazing. I mean, we talked about a similar deck that Christopher Larson top 64'd with a little over a month ago. But I think the addition of Diligent Excavator is just night and day. That's just a game changer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the previous version was, it was like the Rock. This version is like a combo kill deck. And it's multiple different kinds of advantage bearing, right? Like, you don't have to just pour all your resources into Excavate or Kethis. It's just an exciting thing that you can do. If this deck retains the ability to, play good cards out of the graveyard for cheap, right? Like, like if they don't kill your Kethis and they're trying to just play Magic with you, like they're just trading stuff with you, you just be like, all right, I'm just gonna like remove some cards that are already dead, right? And I'm just gonna essentially draw multiple cards because I'm playing a card at a discount from my graveyard that may generate card advantage, right? If you're getting back anything along the lines of a Tamiyo, a Teferi, or an Oath of Kaya, like, those cards are all worth more than a card.
Yep. But this wasn't the only dope deck of the weekend. I mean, Standard is... it's amazing what happens when there's no Pro Tour to really collapse the format down. But... the number of different decks that showed up this week in various formats, like, obviously there was some dope stuff like Goalless, Tireless Pilgrim getting a little bit of an update. But the kind of thing I'm really drawn to is, like, for instance, what do you think of this Judith deck? Did you see Coco Natsukaze's 5-0 list from the league this past week?
Yes.
And this is a straight red-black, avoiding some of the mana problems.
Yeah, so it's got a ton of Chandra, Acolyte of Flame, so 4x of that. But then it's like a super aggro deck with Flame of Keld. It's got Priest of Forgotten
Gods. Part of that
Gods.
is Priest of Forgotten Gods is just unreal with Chandra, right?
Yeah, so like Priest of Forgotten Gods has the ability to tap and sacrifice 2 other creatures, and then the opponent has to, lose life and sacrifice a creature, and then you not only add 2 mana, you draw a card, conveniently, Chandra Acolyte of Flame makes 2 guys, right? So it's just like that's a sick 1-2 punch, or maybe 2-3, right? You played Priest of Forgotten Gods on turn 2, then you played Chandra, make some guys. If in the real Magical Christmas Land situation, you're smacking them with those guys, and then you tap the Priest of Forgotten Gods. The opponent gets messed up. You get more resources. It's happy for you and terrible for them.
The real powerhouse of this deck, the real, like, quietly just unreal aspect is that Flame of Keld you mentioned. You see, the Flame of Keld is deceptively busted in this deck. Flame of Keld's first part, discard your hand, not that good in this deck. But one of the things you're doing is you're playing out the rest of your hand first. Then draw 2 cards, fine. You draw some cards, play whatever they are. But the real action is that on Chapter 3, your red sources, not just your spells, your red sources deal +2 damage, which means that Footlight Fiend does 3 instead of 1. Fanatical Firebrand does 3 instead of 1. Dreadhorde Butcher does at least 3. Judith does 3 for each. Mayhem Devil does 3 for each. The combination of all of them together stack in a way where usually the Flame of Keld will kill your opponent when Chapter 3 happens, assuming that you play the Flame of Keld after advancing your board. Because remember, you get to have all those different permanents sitting in play, which means that even if you have to discard your hand, you still have the threat of just doing 21 or more damage in 2 turns.
Yeah, so just to what you were describing, let's imagine you had like some Dreadhorde Butchers or some Mayhem Devils in play, right? Or Footlight Fiend is actually a pretty good example, right? Like, because it has a dying trigger. Like, you have those guys in play. You have the Flame of Hell go to Chapter 3, so they're boosted offensively. You swing, the opponent blocks, doesn't block, whatever he's going to do to avoid the damage. You can play something like a God Eternal Bantu and then sacrifice guys, right? Like, the Mayhem Devil, the Footlight Fiend, and like the Dreadhorde Butcher. Like, these guys have some dying triggers or some sacrificing triggers. Like, all of a sudden, like, I mean, the Dreadhorde Butcher in particular, right, is like, yeah, it could be like 5 or something, just for that one guy.
Yeah. Obviously, God Eternal Bantu is harder to time because of the Flame of Keld. But
you will have had to draw on it after you played the Flame of Keld, right?
Right. But you do want to have some other avenues, because Priest of Forgotten Gods is like the dream, but that's the best card in your deck anyway. So people are going to be going after it, you know? And one thing you can do with God Eternal Bantu is, if you have it already in play, well, when you Flames a Keld, they're kind of forked, where they're either taking 5 a turn from Bantu, or if they kill Bantu, he's coming back when you want him.
Oh, yeah. You can time it very nicely.
Yeah. And then out of the sideboard, Spark Harvest is not a bad little way to get an additional sack outlet.
Oh, I never thought that I would want to play that card, but it does.
Oh, you played Bone Splinters before, right?
Not in Constructed. I never have.
Spark Harvest, I think, is kind of a nice card right now with how many people are playing Planeswalkers.
I think this deck has some really good stuff going on. I think that this Chandra Acolyte of Flame plus Priest of Forgotten Gods combo is sick, but I'm not so sure about like some of the individual card choices. Like 22 lands and God Eternal Bantu doesn't make a lot of sense to me. 22 lands and Judith doesn't even make that much sense to me. It's like also Midnight Reaper. There's a lot of cards that are like, how many 3s do you want in a deck with 22 lands?
Dude, the Flame of Keld fixes your mana. Besides, Priest of Forgotten Gods makes all your mana problems go away.
Maybe. And I think that there are like a kind of a lot of cards in the main deck that don't do any damage. Like, there are 3 Duress and 3 Cast Down. Like,
I think I don't know if you need the cast downs or not. But I don't think you can. I think you really need the duresses right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that between the Kethis deck and the Scape Shift deck, and plus anybody with sweepers.
I guess I can buy some of that, but like the deck already has some resilience against sweepers. Like Chandra and Flame of Keld are helpful against sweepers. And Duress, I guess Duress can slow people down. I mean, it's hard even to beat a Kethis deck with Duress. Like you can't make them Duress Kethis. You can't make them Duress the Diligent guy, right? Like it's not nothing, right? It's good against Nexus Time Walks. It's good against a lot of the different kind of big spells or combo pieces in the format. But I don't know. I think it's a little inconsistent against Kethis. Maybe you get the Mox early. That's cool.
I would definitely move away from Cast Down. I think with how much Kethis is likely to surge in popularity. Obviously, if you're fortunate, sometimes you can cast down a Diligent Excavator. But I don't think you want to be relying on killing non-legendary creature in the days to come.
No, I in particular don't like it in this deck. Like, I would just much rather that were like a Lightning Strike or something.
Yeah, just something proactive.
Yeah, and also like a Lightning Strike is synergistic with Chapter 3 on the Flame of Keld. Yeah, I just can't wrap my head around casting down in this deck, but it is cool. You did mention Golo's Tireless Pilgrim type deck. Did you see this other deck played by Kumazemi this week with Golo's Tireless Pilgrim? So
yeah,
like this deck has a lot going on to it, right? So it's a Bant deck. It's got like Growth Spiral and Baffling End. And it's got 4 copies of Field of the Dead and 29 lands. So you kind of know where this is going. But the big twist here is no Scape Shift.
Right. It's the same engine. And still have the whole Field of the Dead thing. But instead of actually winning with Scape Shift, there's just a Nexus of Fate plan. And it's all backup plan.
What do you mean it's all backup plan?
It's like you play without Scape Shift the whole time. You're just grinding. You're so just using... Yeah, it's like when you're playing the Scape Shift deck, but you're always on the backup plan. You never draw the Scape Shift.
So this deck has got like a ton of different individual land names, right? So it's 29 lands, but like there's like one Azorius Guildgate, one Blast Zone, one Temple of Mystery, etc. So if you just get Field of the Dead in play, you're probably going to trigger whenever you play a land, right? Like that's the thing that's cool about it. And then it's using, I guess, it's just using Circuitous Route to get like kind of the advantage.
Well, and Golos, Tireless Pilgrim, and I mean that's the real big one.
Well, I'm imagining like once you've got Golos, if somebody is foolhardy enough to let you untap with Golos in play, I think you're just going to Nexus them.
Yeah, but you're still 2-for-1ing them. Like your Rejuvenator 2-for-1s, your Golos 2-for-1s, your Crisis at least 2-for-1s, your Circuitous Route 2-for-1s. So you're getting a lot of value anyway. And then you can eventually set up for the big turn,
Yes.
Because the real money is Golos, Tireless Pilgrim, reveal Nexus of Fate.
Yeah, so the Circuitous Route's like very quietly super strategic in this deck because there's so many guild gates, right? You can get an Is It guild gate, and then you can get let's see what other you get a Golgari
Celestia?
Guild gate. No, well, Golgari and an Is It, I think, are the important ones to hit because Golgari makes black and Is It makes red. Predominantly this deck is Bant colors, but when you get those two, then that lets you in the future, on some future turn, you can actually activate Golos. There's relatively few ways to get red and black mana.
Yep, good point. So I take it you're into this one, huh?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to say which deck is the awesomest this week. I think I like this one, and not even just like it's super powerful, and it's also like super kind of off center. Like, I mean, this is a tremendous character flaw that I have. I hate being in the center. I love something to be a little off center, and this is a very off center deck. So it's harder to hate, right? Like, somebody unmoored egos you for Scape Shift, they're going to be unhappy. Like that's a thing that might happen. But the thing that I really love about it is these time wipes in the sideboard. So, like, hey, you might need to sweep. That's a thing that people need to do. Aggro decks play sweepers in the sideboard. This deck, you can pick up your Crassus, you can pick up your Golos. It's a disaster for the opponent when you successfully time wipe.
Yeah. Yep. So, I mean, you wouldn't be interested in something like James Newstead's version, would you? Because this is one that it still has Scape Shift, but it's using 3 copies of Time Wipe in the main deck.
Oh well, that's a different kind of thing altogether. I don't know. Maybe I'd be super into it. You know what? I'm not into it. It has Elite Guard Mage, and I hate that guy.
I can't get into the space of wanting to cut Hydroid Crassus for Elite Guard
That
Mage.
makes no sense to me. Like, there are 2 Crassus and 1 Elite Guard Mage. I mean, I guess 4 Elite Guard Mage is better than Crassus on exactly 4 mana, right?
Yeah, I guess.
But almost every other amount of mana.
I'm not even sure it is, though, because when you time wipe, you really would like that guy to be Crassus.
Yeah, I'm not into it. But this deck is kind of odd numbers. Actually, they're literally odd numbers, right? So 3 Circuitous Route, 3 Scape Shift, 3 Time Wipe. Man, I know if I were to play this deck, that Elite Guard Mage could be put to better use as one of those cards, if not a Crassus. Because you don't need too many finishers.
Dude, what do you think of Agent of Treachery in the sideboard?
I think that card is fantastic. In fact, when I won half a promo pack at FNM last week, I took Agent of Treachery as my first pick as the FNM champ.
Nice.
So Agent of Treachery is a 7 casting cost 2/3. So don't all go right home at the same time. But he's got a lot of sweet text, right? So,
not really. He's got a little sweet text, and then he's got some irrelevant text, right?
Fair enough. But when he enters the battlefield, you gain control of target permanent. So for 7, he's kind of like
and you keep it.
A confiscate, right? That, and then at the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more permanents you don't own, you draw 3 cards. So in the context of like a deck with a lot of stealing stuff, like if you have mass manipulation or anything like that, he becomes a pretty strong engine. I guess you have to keep him in play though, and he's only a 2/3 for 7.
Yeah, and like a deck like this can't even trigger him.
Let's see. You've got 2 Agent of Treachery total. Yeah, I think you might be right on that. So
the purpose is the fact that you can just confiscate your opponent's Planeswalker that's about to go ultimate.
Yeah, but if that's your plan, is it better than a mass manipulation?
Well, most people don't do that. Most people don't play Agent of Treachery. They play mass manipulation.
I was thinking maybe it has some advantage here because of Time Wipe, right? So
that's true. That's pretty good.
It's just worse than the non-creature versions, but if you can... Actually, there you go, Patrick. You can draw 2 Agent of Treachery, or you can draw an Agent of Treachery and 2 Time Wipes. You could potentially be in Trigger Zone. That's how you would do it.
How?
Agent of Treachery.
What are you stealing that your Time Wipe isn't killing?
A Planeswalker. Wait.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that works.
That's all right. A Planeswalker you can steal.
There you go.
Steal 3 Planeswalkers.
Dude, you could just Teferi. You don't even need Time Wipe. Just Teferi your own.
There you go.
Agent of Treachery.
I think that in my head has spawned a terrible deck. I'm like, how many Agent of Treacheries and mass manipulations can I cram into this poor deck? It will not be good. Somebody is going to lightning strike this Agent of Treachery that I just spent 7 mana on. But you can imagine how powerful it would be if nobody bothered you.
Mm.
Would still probably lose to one of these decks that goes bigger than just a 2-for-1.
Yeah, although there is a 2-for-1-esque deck that Man, I can't help but be pulled towards Kato 222's Grixis, 4 Narset, Parter Veils, 4 Nicobolus, Dragon God, 4 Nicobolus the Ravager, 2 Chandra, Awakened Inferno, with an interesting removal package involving 3 Cry of the Carnarium, 3 Legion's End, and 2 Ritual of Soot for 8 ways to sweep zombie tokens. And then a little bit more spot removal. No permission or card draw, just a lot of 2-for-1s already. But then 3 Bedevil, 4 Cast Down, 2 Disfigure. Disfigure. Not burn.
Disfigure is fast.
Disfigure compared to Shock.
Well,
it kills a Danto Vanguard, but that's about it, right?
Well,
which maybe that's enough.
The deck is very biased towards black versus red, right? So it's got like all of these sorceries are black. Every single one of them.
That's
is black.
True.
The only red cards are really like the single red pip on Bedevil, and then the red pips on Boluses, and then I guess Chandra has double red, but that's at least it's.
That's pretty late.
You know what I do love about this deck? Speaking of red, is Blood Sun in the side.
I had a feeling you'd be drawn to that one.
Like, I feel like some of these decks are so single-minded right now. I mean, just how terrible is Blood Sun for some people, right? You draw a card also.
Yeah, you play Blood Sun and it cantrips, and now your opponent's Field of the Dead does nothing.
It's terrible for them. It's great for you, right? Like, if you're like Blood Sun on turn 3, Bolus on turn 4, like you're up a substantial amount of cards, right? Like, you're literally up 2 cards, and then you're like figuratively up some X amount of utility in the future as well.
Yeah, I think Blood Sun is just such a smart move. I mean, we're seeing that a few different places. Like Stone Throwing Devil's 5-0 mono red list. 4 copies of Blood Sun in the sideboard to help it adapt to the Scape Shift menace.
Yeah, absolutely. This deck is pretty straightforward otherwise, right? It's about the deck from last cycle, except for he's got like some Ember Haulers rather than Viashinos, and then 1 Chandra Acolyte of Flame instead of like a 4 casting cost Chandra, I guess. And then just adds Fry to the sideboard as well as Blood Sun for kind of some updated cards.
I'm just glad people have chilled out on Risen Reef. Man, was that a whole thing for a little while.
I mean, that card was being played in decks that had almost no other ways to trigger Risen Reef, right? Like, there were decks
people were out of control.
Well, Risen Reef it's worst, not worst case, but it's pretty close to a Rejuvenator, right? It's not that far off of Rejuvenator, and it's stats.
It's pretty close. Yeah.
You know, so if you draw like a Risen Reef and a Rejuvenator, like a Risen Reef and a Risen Reef is better than that, I think. And people are happy to play Rejuvenator. So that's kind of the mind space I put it in.
What did you think of Heber's 5-0 Esper Citadel deck? You know, this whole... You know, this type of Bolas Citadel list that people play that's like Narsets and Teferis and Basilica Bellhaunt and Kaya's Wrath. And so the updates, first of all, like everybody else, for Legion, like just Legion's End. That's just the new card, man.
It's a very good card.
Yeah. And then... beyond the Legion's End update, notably, the sideboard contains... first of all, he moved the Command the Dreadhorde to the sideboard. Kept the Citadel main deck, but moved the Command the Dreadhorde to the sideboard for slow matchups. But he's also got a couple copies of Fall of the Thran. This is that 6-cost where Chapter 1 is Destroy All Lands. And then we go from here. Chapter 2, each player returns 2 lands from their graveyard to the battlefield, and same with Chapter 3.
So, Fall of the Thran is probably like a pretty powerful card that you can play in 2 ways. One of them is, if you've got an advantage specifically with Planeswalkers and you play Fall of the Thran, like, that's a pretty strong position to be in, right? Right, like, those are powerful permanents that can generate advantages without having to use mana. So not having any mana is going to be like less of a liability to you. Now, secondly, if you play Fall of the Thran and then you have Teferi Time Raveler in play, you could bounce Fall of the Thran, and then your opponent doesn't get first dibs at drawing land back, right?
Yeah, nobody gets land back at all, in fact.
But I'm just saying that's fine. Like, one of the things that is a negative about Fall of the Thran is the opponent has, gets their land, and they can just use it once you hit Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. And so if you just prevent that from happening, then, it's a kind of a true Armageddon.
Yep.
Armageddoning is an age-old way to win games if you have any amount of advantage in play.
You could also potentially just replay the Fall of the Thran. Because you might play the Fall of the Thran on 6 just to buy yourself time, like against the Scapeshift deck. And then you're rebuilding and you're still doing stuff, but then you drop Teferi, bounce your Fall of the Thran, and then you could just replay it. Like, it's not ideal, but like if the game goes long, it could easily come to that.
I think that you make a great point, right? So Fall of the Thran costs 6, which is under the kind of critical mass of a Scapeshift deck, or at least it can be, depending on how much ramp has gone on. And so if you just cast Fall of the Thran successfully, particularly if you have Teferi Time Reveler in play, like they can't counter it if you've got that card in play, then you just disrupt them from being able to go off. So if you have like a regular advantage with, I don't know, some guys like some Bell Haunts or something that's getting you towards the finish line a little bit, the fact that you turned off their ability to combo you out is, I think that's maybe good enough.
Yeah. I did want to note, by the way, we keep talking about how everybody's got all these answers to zombies and Scapeshift and everything like that. All these sweet decks, don't let it fool you. The Bana Scapeshift deck is still the defining deck of the format. The whole deck, the format's like warped around.
Yeah.
Like the team open in Richmond, I think there was something like 11 Bant decks in the top 16.
Like number 1 in Standard was a Bant Scapeshift deck, right?
Right. But there were a couple of cool decks from this list. It's not exactly, groundbreaking or anything like that, but it's been flying under the radar. Is It Phoenix by Daniel Santohir. And this is, the whole Finale of Promise thing still with Radical Idea, Opt, Tormenting Voice, and just Chart a Course, and just trying to be very cantrip-centric with Goblin Electromancer. I never really could get into this deck, though, but, it's nice seeing it actually reemerge.
So, I agree with you on that front, but I think the strategy is kind of bad right now, just relative to what else is going on. It's bad against Narset and it's bad against Teferi. You're
that's a tough place to be.
It's really, really tough to be the Tormenting Voice Chart a Course guy in a format where Narset is a pretty popular card, right? And then it's also tough to be the Goblin Electromancer guy when everybody is just every deck that can tap for B is adding Legion's End, right? And not for you, I just think all that's tough. And then separately, you have the emergence of the Kethis deck, and you have sideboard cards for Scapeshift that include Ashiok, which, by the way, the extra text on that happens to foul your whole graveyard-centric strategy. I guess Crackling Drake still counts, but it turns off your Arclight Phoenixes. It really takes a lot of the edge off of your Finale of Promise. It hurts Beacon Bolt. So I don't know. I think in another universe, this is one of the best decks, but I think that with how the rest of the format is largely what cards they like, it's tough to be the Phoenix guy.
Yeah, it's not like everybody's just grinding you out with cheap removal, So, what do you think of Bant Scapeshift versus like the Bant Ramp deck? And we've been seeing this list, this style, like Kane Reinhardt's second place list. But this particular take notably has 3 Voracious Hydras. And this is that deck that has just tons of, Llanowar Elf, Paradise Druid, Leafkin Druid, Nissa Who Shakes the World X4. But like, what do you think of 3 copies of Voracious Hydra as part of your how to go big plan?
I mean, it's a very good payoff, like on a casting cost to what you're getting out of it basis. I don't know that it's like meaningfully better or different than some of the other stuff you could be playing. Like that could be a mass manipulation. It could be a finale of some kind. I guess like you get some bonus associated with the fact that it's a creature, so it wipes time, but it's not particularly special, I don't think.
The fact that it can't hit planeswalkers makes me kind of skeptical of it, at least in the week to come.
I'm not super into this strategy. Like, I feel like it has some incentive, and it's not even that great, right? Like, this is a deck that's got 4 Leafkin Druids and 4 Risen Reefs. Like, it just really falls into the category of being into Risen Reef, but not really being into Risen Reef. Like, the Teamer decks that are Risen Reef decks, they lean hard into that Risen Reef. They're getting paid a lot. This deck is like getting paid a little bit, and I mean, I guess Leafkin Druid's an okay card. It's not.
It's definitely an okay card. Yeah, it's fine. But here's the thing: what I'm wondering is, if this deck is just not well positioned, how did 4 copies make the top 16?
Well, I don't know that it's not well positioned. I just think that like there are a lot of different decks that you can play in Standard, and I mean, this might be a Prime Directive thing. Like, I feel like if I had to choose between this strategy and Bant Scapeshift, I would choose Bant Scapeshift. Like, is that a fair paradigm? Or I might even like I'm
playing the Kethis deck personally.
I think the Kethis deck is the most attractive of the potential decks, and part of the reason for that is like its Plan B is so robust. And it's also super fast, right? Relative to, like the Securitas route-based decks take a long time to actually get to where they're trying to get to. Versus, like, if you have the Dream Draw with the Kethis deck, you might get them on turn 3. Now, that doesn't happen so often, but it might happen. Like, that possibility doesn't even exist for some of the other decks.
Did you see the blue-black control deck over in the Classic? Miles Miller, who apparently was committed to playing control. This list is it wins with 3 God Eternal Kefnet, and you've also got 2 Liliana Dreadhorde General and 2 Enter the God Eternals. But this is just a control deck all the way down. 4 Narset Barter Veils, 3 Cast Down, Noxious Grasp, 3 Vraska's Contempts, 2 Cry the Canarium, 2 Legion's End, and then some discard and permission with Search for Azcanta to really get a big mana advantage. This deck just seems like it's like so a year ago.
I really like this deck, actually.
What gives it enough juice? How do you get over the finish line?
I was plotting out what I wanted to play next myself in Standard, and there's a lot of exciting decks that you could potentially play. I mean, I won't lie. Part of it is I own most of this deck already, so I don't have to... Like, for some of the other decks, just acquiring a lot of the cards is just... It'll take longer time. But I do like this deck for a couple of reasons. One of them is it's extremely robust against some strategies. Like, if you're playing against vampires, for example, this deck is very well set up to fight against vampires. It has, like, a ton of tools that are good against fast guys. And it even has, like, Vraska's Contempt to interact with their planeswalkers and more expensive guys. And then if you just untap with God Eternal Kefnet and play, like, this deck... It's not the best God Eternal Kefnet deck. Like, it only has, like, 4 opts for instant speed card drawing. But, like, decks that draw only 1 card per turn, I think, are very hard-pressed to beat this deck. Now, secondly, if you're going to start from the position that Bant Scapeshift is kind of the deck to beat, I think this deck is pretty well positioned against that deck. It's got some negates main deck, which, it's not a ton, but that is some interaction for a
and Thought Erasure.
Yep, that again, you have like some kind of deadweight stuff in Cast Down, but other creature removal is not that bad. For example, Legion's End and Cryocarnarium are actually both very good against Scapeshift. And after sideboarding, you bring in all these Unmoored Egos, you've got an Ashiok. Like, I think this deck can perform against a lot of different strategies. And one of the things that I think is just quietly great about it, this is one of the absolute best decks in Standard against Mono Red. It's fantastic against Mono Red. Like, God Eternal Kefnet is, like, not unbeatable for them, but it's very hard to beat. And you have, like, a lot of this kind of angled in Moment of Craving and Vraska's Contempt type stuff to kind of give you more room against life total. And, I mean, Enter the God Eternals, forget about it. Like, this deck is great against Mono Red, very good against vampires, very good resistance to Scapeshift. It's not the fastest deck, but, like, it's all, like, it absolutely murder a lot of the decks. And,
You're not being a dinosaur deck.
I don't even know how you would kill, like, their third dinosaur.
I guess you do. I guess the nice thing is at least you can sideboard a bunch more Vraska's Contempts and Noxious Grasps. But I did want to mention, I actually just think it's super bold and brilliant to main deck Noxious Grasp. I think more people should be looking at main deck Noxious Grasp. Teferi Time Raveler is so warping. I think the fact that Noxious Grasp is like good against vampires, good against Teferi, good against all these, like Voracious Hydra. Like, how many decks can you not Noxious Grasp? I mean, obviously, nobody wants to. Yeah, but nobody wins with Mono Red. Besides, you're already good against Mono Red.
Yeah, you're great against Mono Red.
Right, and you do take it as an L against Mono Blue. But I don't think this deck's going to be very well positioned against Mono Blue anyway.
Mono Blue would probably thrash this deck, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a calculated gamble.
Given that no one's playing Mono Blue right now.
Not many people. But, like, El Yalo went 5-0 in the league with a Mono Blue, and this is the style of Mono Blue with 2 Lookouts Dispersal. And 3 Brineborn Cutthroat.
That
in a little bit creature
that's a card
heavy.
I do not go 3 of. That Brineborn Cutthroat is like the best card. It's so good.
In Mono Blue?
It's fantastic.
It's the best card. It's like, it's very good in Simic Flash. But, like, is it the best card in Mono Blue?
It's not nearly as good in Mono Blue as it is in Simic Flash, but I still think...
You know what card I like in Mono Blue?
What?
Dive Down.
That's very good in Mono Blue.
Curious Obsession. Those 2 cards are the 2 cards I like.
You know what I like in Mono Blue? Cerulean Drake. Let me tell you about Cerulean Drake wearing Curious Obsession. Try losing. It's not going to be easy.
Against Mono Red?
I mean...
Dude, nobody plays Mono Red.
I think that Cerulean Drake is quietly good in non-Mono Red matchups. I think in particular, it's good in matchups where the opponent is relying on red removal. So, imagine you're playing...
That's part of the reason you need Disfigure.
Yeah, but if you're playing against dinosaurs, for example, right, which has... If it has removal, it's primarily red removal. Like, Cerulean Drake actually...
Or it's weird stuff like Collision Colossus.
Which is reddish, right?
Yeah.
So, like that...
It counts. Still counts as red.
That's, like, going to be a really, really good card to play. And also can absorb some dinosaurs, right? But then you get Obsession on it, it's just kind of getting you there because your deck just kind of needs to be in a position where you haven't lost, and your Tempest Djinns at any amount of mana can compete with their guys. Like, it's not going to be as big as their biggest dinosaurs, right? But, like, it's going to be bigger than some of their dinosaurs. It's typically very favorable on the mana, and then you can just get them, right? Like, if you got, like, an open mana, like, 1 dive down can be miserable for them. And I think just, like, getting that Obsession in, getting in for 2 or 3 damage and drawing a card is very attractive. Now, it's the death knell for Mono Red, but just any deck relying on red removal, I think this card's pretty good.
One of the problems I have with Mono Blue, though, is that I think a lot of the things that people are doing to be better against Scapeshift are kind of accidentally good against you. You know, like there's a lot of people who are just playing like Cry the Carnarium or any of these options for just sweeping the tokens up. You know, like Legion's End, for instance, or whatever.
So almost all the creatures.
Yeah. All right, so I think my deck of the week is still easy, the Kethis deck. What do you think, man? Are you into the scape shift?
I like Kethis a lot. I like the Golos Circuitous route strategy a lot, and I gotta say I like that black-blue deck a lot. Those are the three I like the best. And I'm just thinking about which deck to pull the trigger on. Humiliatingly, I just played my mono green deck from last season so far because I just haven't gotten any new cards. But
major shout out to Vinay Gupta, who finished 38th with a Kalia Zenith Seeker Angel Demon Dragon deck. Love it. Mostly angels.
Well, that's very admirable. I see that Bishop of Wings was setting up some of those angels, so super solid. And yet has room for both 2 Lyra Dawnbringers and 3 Skargan Hellkites at the 5.
Plus a Demon Lord Bell's Nillock at the 6.
I gotta tell you, Aurelia Exemplar of Justice is not where I would start the cuts. It's not. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's one Aurelia. Isn't Aurelia better than, like, Seraph of Scales and Sorin most of the time? I'd rather have Aurelia than Shalai in this deck.
Yeah, it's tough for me to get into three Shalais anyway.
Yeah. All right, I mean, still, props to Vinay.
Yeah. Super dope. Love to see it. All right, dude. See you next week, man.
Bye-bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredges for jail or hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault with nothing but time. Parents and my friends were the key to find. Magic gave me purpose and drive. The game, the love, it kept me alive. Visions of better weather.